Welcome to the third dimension. The United Nations led project to prevent a catastrophic oil spill from the decaying FSO Safa supertanker off Yemen's coast has begun with the transfer of over 1 million barrels of oil from the vessel. For years, many organizations have warned that the neglected vessel Safa may cause a major oil spill or even explode. Observers describe the diplomatic push leading to the Safa's oil transfer as a significant lesson for other tracks aimed at resolving the 9-year war in Yemen. To discuss this topic, join me, David Gressley, the UN resident and humanitarian coordinator in Yemen. Mr. Gressley brings to the role more than 40 years of international experience in peacekeeping, humanitarian assistance, as well as an extensive political and security knowledge in complex emergencies and conflict situations. Welcome to the third dimension, Mr. Gressley.
Thank you.
If I may start at the beginning, if we would like to describe Safa's salvage operation in the terms of the United Nations Secretary General, he says, "This is an all-hands-on-deck mission and the culmination of nearly 2 years of political groundwork, fundraising and project development." What is your take on this?
Well, I think he was absolutely correct, having lived through that and having led the process here in Yemen. It was an enormous effort to get to where we are today. Very pleased at where we are today. But it's not easy in the context of an ongoing war to get the parties in conflict to work together on even a common threat like the Safa presented. And I think it's a testament to all the parties' recognition of the seriousness of the problem that we've been able to make the progress that we've seen here today with their full cooperation. So I'm very pleased to see what has been done so far. We just need to finish the job now.
Okay. Now, if we start with the replacement vessel itself, Mr. Gressley, some observers raise the concerns that why buying a ship with only 5-year shelf life, okay, as if they are suggesting we are adding another ticking bomb to Safa. How do you react?
Well, I'm not sure where anyone gets the 5-year shelf life. The inspection report itself that was conducted by the United Nations before procuring the vessel indicated it was in very good shape and could easily be used as offshore storage for 20, 30 or more years. So this is a totally different situation. Secondly, we were facing an imminent threat. Imminent, I think, is a key word, that this vessel could explode or sink at any moment, which is no longer the case as the oil moves into a much newer vessel that's got 21st century environmental safeguards that did not exist when this vessel was built in 1976. So we had a choice. Either find a way to take the oil off the old vessel while we work out long-term solutions on how to sell the oil, move the oil out, or just sit there and watch it decay and collapse into the Red Sea with all the consequences that I'm sure we're going to talk about. So it was the best path forward, and universally that was accepted by the parties, but also by 23 countries that contributed to this effort financially, plus the private sector that also contributed to this. So there are many who believe that this was the right path. And of course, I'm one of those. And I think we have averted a really imminent threat by moving that oil off that old vessel.
Okay. Now, as you raised the threat of Safa and what disaster it could cause in terms of environment pollution, etc. Now, one scientist from the Greenpeace wonders, okay, if the threat is so huge, then why has this been left so long?
Well, I think in normal circumstances it would not have been left so long. The reality is that when the war started, this vessel had 1 million barrels of oil on board. There was no longer any vessels that could come in and take the oil off. And with ongoing fighting, and you have to remember, of course, for many years the front lines were at the edge of the city of Hodeidah itself. So it was right there in the middle of the conflict. So it was not an easy situation in which to organize a salvage operation. That's why it took so long, in fact, was to find the political basis on which an operation could move forward with the full cooperation, not only acceptance, but cooperation of all parties. And it was a political issue much more than a technical issue. Solving the political issue allowed us to move forward technically.
Okay. Now, step 1 is accomplished, Mr. Grisly, and step 2 is underway. Okay. What is next?
Well, of course, just to reiterate what step 1 was, that was to prepare the old Sapphire for offloading the oil, which the Smith Salvage Company did extremely well. And we're seeing the result of that as we speak. The transfer is now underway. As of today, over 500,000 barrels have already been transferred. We're basically halfway done now. And that rate will likely continue for the next several days. And we can see the end of this in the next week to 10 days. After that will be a need to install the Yemen, the vessel formerly known as Nautica, to a buoy that's anchored to the pipeline to complete the storage operation, the offshore storage operation itself. And then ultimately the vessel needs to be cleaned and towed away, scrapped, so it doesn't represent an ongoing threat. And we have ongoing discussions about other potential needs that may be there, but that's outside the scope of this project. What we're focusing on here is ending this particular threat.
Okay, so we share with you this priority, Mr. Grisly, that ending the threat is the pressing need now more than any other issue, okay? But also there is, the question remains that about the ownership of the oil, Mr. Grisly, okay? You said in a previous statement that the issue is not still resolved, okay? So in your point of view, how are you going to fix this issue, the ownership of the oil?
Well, that's more an issue for the parties concerned. I think, as you know, the way the oil was extracted in the past and represented by the oil that's on board the Sapphire today, there were many different state-owned and private companies involved, each of which has a stake in the oil that's remaining on the FSO Sapphire. So there's some legal issues that would need to be resolved. That would need the cooperation of the parties, of course, for that to take place. And that's likely to take some time, which is why the focus was getting the oil off the Sapphire onto a new vessel to allow that to go forward without worrying that the vessel might sink tomorrow. So that allows for a more a clearer discussion on how to deal with that problem. That too is not a part of this project, but this project will enable that discussion to go forward.
Okay, so in case the ownership of the oil issue remains controversial, Mr. Grisly, okay, one observer suggested, why not the United Nations, what we call opens escrow, a kind of an escrow account for this? Is that possible?
Very much possible. We've offered that as a possibility. That's a mechanism that has been used elsewhere. So yes, it's quite possible, but there has been no decision at this point in time that that's where the parties want to go.
Okay. Now, if we turn to the humanitarian situation in Yemen, away from Safa, Mr. Grisly, okay, and
Sure.
Latest reports say that 21 million Yemeni need humanitarian assistance in 2023. The question is, does the response plan meet such dire needs?
Well, the response plan itself, yes, the plan does, because it's quite comprehensive. But it's a $4.3 billion plan, which we're not receiving that much funding. Right now, we're about 32%, about a third funded right now. So that has that limits what we can implement inside the plan. So the problem is not the plan. The problem is the funding coming in. And as you know, globally, from a financial point of view, getting donor contributions continues to be a struggle. Yemen does reasonably well compared to most other emergencies. It's still one of the top 3 or 4 recipients of humanitarian assistance in the world, comparable to Ukraine or Afghanistan. So there's still considerable international support for Yemen, but the money is hard to come by nonetheless. And so that means we need to really work with authorities, local authorities, to find the best way to use the limited resources we do have to maximize their benefit. And we are going through different exercises to see how we can better integrate our work for greater output, better targeting to make sure we're getting to the most vulnerable people. So that's what we're going to focus on in the weeks and months ahead to try to deal with this limitation of funding problem that we all face.
Okay. Now, also, you may have followed that the World Food Programme just 2 days back announced that they cut what we call the Malnutrition Prevention Initiative, Mr. Grisly, and this is frightening for Yemenis. So the question is the international community turning back to Yemen when the most focus goes to Ukraine, for instance?
Well, as I mentioned before, it's a global problem. And the World Food Programme is they're not making cuts because they want to, they're making cuts because they don't have the funding. I need to be clear about that. But as I mentioned before, Yemen, despite the difficulties we have raising funding, still do better than most countries, and is still comparable to what's going into Ukraine and Afghanistan. So I don't think the world is turning its back on Yemen specifically, but there is a broad potential problem right now, which does, and so it needs to be understood in that particular context. There's still considerable support for Yemen, and so that's one of my jobs, in fact, is to try to keep that message out there that this war has been devastating. The impact on people has been devastating. Families, no jobs, no incomes, and people becoming quite dependent on assistance to sustain their own lives. So that's a message we continue to circulate throughout the world on international media. And so far, that media has been receptive to this message and wants to make sure that the situation in Yemen is well covered. But the reality financially, globally, is still a significant factor.
Okay. Now, another issue facing humanitarian operations in Yemen, Mr. Grisly, and this issue has been emphasized by United Nations officials in different briefings. That is, restrictions put on aid workers when delivering aid, okay? And hundreds of times, Houthis have been blamed for such acts, blocking humanitarian aid workers. What has your office done in order to curb Houthis stop such acts?
Well, we find access to be a problem throughout the country, often for different reasons. Here in the north, I'm in Sana'a right now, there are a number of bureaucratic restrictions. We don't face security issues per se, limiting our ability to get out, but we do have bureaucratic impediments that we work to overcome. In the end, we usually succeed in that, but it takes time and considerable negotiation. We would like to see how to accelerate that. But that's the primary problem that we face here in the northern part of the country. In the southern part of the country, we also have some bureaucratic issues as well that we work to overcome. It's a constant negotiation. But also insecurity is becoming an increasing problem. As you know, one of our World Food Program colleagues was murdered, less than 2 weeks ago. So
Yes.
we have 5 hostages being held that were taken hostage in Abiyan. So the insecurity is a constraint as well that we're working with local authorities to overcome. So we have challenges throughout the country that slow, but they don't stop. And I want to emphasize that word. We still find a way to deliver. It may take a little bit longer than we would like. It may take more negotiations than we like. But we still find a way to make that assistance deliver to the beneficiaries.
Okay. A final point, Mr. Gressley, if you may. Now, some observers
Sure.
describe the diplomatic push leading to sulfur oil transfer as a significant lesson for other tracks to make use of in resolving this conflict. As a person who has got this kind of vast experience in conflict resolving, etc., do you see sulfur salvage operation as an indicator for future settlement, for instance?
Well, it certainly doesn't hurt. It demonstrates that the parties can work even when they have high distrust, which is what you get in a civil war, and that there are ways to move forward. It's actually created, interestingly, a lot of support in, for the people of Yemen as well, who've been very happy to see this initiative come forward. It gives hope. And hope is always useful in these kinds of situations. So yes, I would like to think so. We'll see how things go forward. Really, we need to find a way to end this war, so that we can let people get back to their normal lives, build their own lives back, be able to have their kids go to school, have a job, have the dignity of a job, return home. We have 4.5 million people who need to go home. So yes, if this helps, that would be a great thing. And it does indicate that it's possible to find solutions even in a complex conflict like we see here in Yemen.
Okay. Perhaps a final word to vulnerable Yemenis, Mr. Gressley, who have been frightened by food insecurity, by lack of healthcare services, etc. What do you say to those Yemenis nationwide?
Well, they have a very solid point. I've traveled almost every governorate in the country, and I see basically the same problem everywhere. If you're talking about the health system, let's start with that. The bulk of the health care is now more concentrated in government capital level at the hospitals there, because people just don't have access in the areas outside of the government capitals. And I've seen and heard horror stories of women trying to get treatment for they're expecting, they're pregnant, looking for assistance, and they have to travel large distances. They have no money to do so. More complicated operations are often impossible to do here. Once again, if you're in a rural area, you're not going to get that care. So that's very scary right there. And then, of course, you mentioned food security. I'm really worried about malnutrition because that can affect a generation of children. Stunting is a major problem, rates ranging from 20 to 40%, and stunting has a lifelong impact. So all of these issues will continue until the war ends, and it will continue to deteriorate the living standards of average people in Yemen until the war ends. Got to find a solution to the war.
Okay. With that remark, we come to the end of this interview, Mr. Gressley. Thank you so much for talking to Yemenis through Yemen Today TV.
My pleasure. Thank you very much.
That's all for this time. See you next week with a new edition of The Third Dimension.